Could the Great Flood represent a catastrophic event, orchestrated or influenced by ancient aliens, which reshaped the face of Earth and forever altered the course of human development, as well as our understanding of the cosmos and our place within it?
Just as Noah sought to safeguard humanity from the ravages of the flood, we too must safeguard our online presence from potential threats. And that's where Surfshark VPN comes in. Now you can get 3 extra months for free using our promo code Secret Origins. Once I was sitting in a city cafe, I connected to the public Wi-Fi there. However, a cyber thief silently attempted to breach the unsecured connection and steal my data. But luckily, I had Surfshark, which encrypts your data, making it nearly impossible for anyone to intercept or steal your sensitive information. With Surfshark, you can also say goodbye to geo-restrictions and watch your favorite shows and movies from anywhere in the world, even if they're only available in certain places. This video was sponsored by Surfshark, and with our exclusive promo code Secret Origins, you'll unlock amazing benefits like enhanced privacy, secure browsing, and access to geo-restricted content. Plus, you'll get 3 extra months for free. Don't miss out on this opportunity. Click the link in the description box to find more information and try Surfshark VPN today.
The notion of a cataclysmic event that shocked the world is not just a figment of human imagination. In fact, there are myriad of ancient accounts describing lost cities and great floods which can be found across different cultures and civilizations. Tales of divine retribution in the form of devastating floods are prevalent in various myths, hinting at a shared experience among diverse societies. One such legend that recounts a great flood sent by the gods to cleanse the world is the Epic of Gilgamesh. Actually, there are several Sumerian myths about the Great Flood that bear striking similarities to the biblical story of Noah's Ark, which has led some researchers to believe that they share a common origin. In the Bible's book of Genesis, it is written that Yahweh, who created man from dust, decided to bring the Great Flood to earth because of mankind's increasing corruption and downfall. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I've created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. Yahweh was however pleased with Noah and instructed him to create an ark for saving humans and animals. On completion of the ark, Noah, his entire family, and 2 of every type of animal on earth entered the ark. Once the door of the ark was closed, the destructive flood started and cleared all other living beings from the face of the earth. After the flood ended, everyone inside the ark came out, and Yahweh promised never to subject humans to something like the Great Flood again. The rainbow is known as the symbol of Yahweh's promise. But what if before the story of Noah and the flood, there is another version of this catastrophic event and of a human who was saved by the gods? In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero encounters the character Utnapishtim, who, like Noah, was instructed by a god to build a large boat and fill it with animals and his family in anticipation of a great flood. But what was the reason behind the flood described there? Was it sent again as punishment for humanity? The myth begins with the creation of humans by the gods, also known as the Anunnaki, or in other words, the extraterrestrial beings who came from the sky. Enki genetically engineered and mixed the DNA of Homo erectus with his own and created humans to work as laborers who mine gold, taking care of the gods' needs and maintaining their temples. Over time, the human population grew, and their noise disturbed Enlil, Enki's brother and the main ruler of Earth, who couldn't sleep because of it. Enlil convened a council of the gods, and they decided to send a series of plagues and famines to reduce the human population. 1200 years had not yet passed when the land extended and the peoples multiplied. The land was billowing like a bull. The god got disturbed with their uproar. Enlil heard their noise and addressed the great gods. The noise of mankind has become too intense for me. With their uproar, I am deprived of sleep. Cut off supplies for the peoples. Let there be a scarcity of planet life to satisfy their hunger. Finally, Enlil decided to send a great flood to wipe out humanity once and for all. But Enki, feeling compassionate towards the humans he had created, decided to defy Enlil's plan. He appeared to Atrahasis Utnapishtim in a dream, revealing the divine plan to send a flood and providing detailed instructions to build a massive boat that would save him, his family, and a pair of each animal species. Enlil, upon discovering that Atrahasis and his family had survived, was initially furious with Enki for defying his orders. However, the other gods, including Enki, persuaded Enlil to accept the survival of humanity as a necessary part of the divine plan. Enlil relented and blessed Atrahasis and his family. He also made a covenant with humanity, vowing never to send another flood to destroy them completely. The Great Flood is present in the midst of ancient cultures, and its potential extraterrestrial origin raises questions such as why it happened and what caused it. Some researchers suggest that these beings could have been attempting to destroy a hybrid race of giants, the result of interbreeding between extraterrestrial and human women, as described in the ancient Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch is a non-canonical Jewish religious text that tells the story of Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, who lived in the antediluvian period before the Great Flood. Enoch is portrayed as a righteous man who receives divine revelations and is granted access to heavenly realms. He is shown the mysteries of creation and the workings of celestial bodies and the ultimate fate of humanity. Enoch also learns about the Watchers, the fallen angels who disobeyed God and caused corruption on earth. These celestial beings were said to have been captivated by human women and engaged in relationships with them, resulting in the birth of a hybrid race known as the Nephilim. The Nephilim were described as giants and were thought to possess immense strength and power, which they used to corrupt and wreak havoc on Earth. According to the Book of Giants, the Nephilim were responsible for committing dreadful acts, including the merciless killing of humans and even consuming their flesh. As a result, God determines that the Earth must undergo a purification process and selects Noah, the great-grandson of Enoch, as the chosen individual to begin humanity afresh. The interbreeding between humans and these otherworldly beings could have been seen as a violation of the natural order, and thus the Great Flood might have been orchestrated as a response to this transgression. If extraterrestrial beings possessed advanced technologies, as many ancient astronaut theorists suggest, they could have had the capability to manipulate celestial bodies, like comets or asteroids, and direct them towards Earth to initiate the Great Flood. In this context, the purpose behind the flood might have been to clean the earth of the Nephilim, who were considered an abomination, and to reset the balance of life on the planet. In ancient Hindu teaching, the story of Manu parallels the experience of Utnapishtim or Noah, as he receives divine guidance to build a ship and save himself, along with various creatures, from the impending deluge. So, who was Manu? In Hindu mythology, Manu is the first man and king who rescues life on Earth from a catastrophic flood. When a small fish, later revealed to be the god Vishnu in disguise, asks Manu for protection, he promises to save Manu from the upcoming deluge. Following Vishnu's instructions, Manu builds a large boat and fills it with pairs of creatures and seeds from various plants. As the flood arrives, Vishnu, in the form of a massive fish, guides the boat through the turbulent waters. Once the flood waters recede, Manu's boat comes to the rest on a mountain, and he proceeds to repopulate the earth with the creatures and plants he had saved. We know that the Hindu gods have quite enigmatic appearances, and Vishnu, with his distinctive blue skin, multiple arms, and celestial Vimana, has sparked speculation about his potential extraterrestrial nature. Not only that, in the story of Manu, Vishnu has disguised as a giant fish, which means he could transform or shape-shift his material body just as many alien beings are described to do. Could Vishnu be a link to a celestial race that once walked among us? The striking similarity in these stories across such diverse cultures has led many anthropologists to speculate that these myths may be rooted in a real event, a catastrophe so immense and unforgettable that it was engraved into the collective memory of humanity and passed down through generations as mythology. The search for evidence supporting ancient flood accounts has led scientists to uncover intriguing clues pointing to the possibility of a global flood or at least a series of significant regional floods. One such clue is the discovery of a potential asteroid impact site in the Indian Ocean. In 2004, a team of researchers discovered a 29-kilometer wide impact crater named the Burkle crater beneath the Indian Ocean. They suggested that an asteroid impact at this site could have generated massive tsunamis, leading to widespread flooding in coastal areas. Another compelling piece of evidence comes from geological formations called chevrons, composed of sediment and marine fossils discovered in Madagascar and Australia. The presence of these marine fossils in elevated areas far from the coastline suggests that massive waves or tsunamis may have once inundated these regions, and the fossils may have been evidence of a global flood event. The possibility of a comet striking Earth around the same time as the end of the last ice age has led to the theory that this event caused a global flood, wiping out advanced civilizations that existed before the flood. One of the most famous examples is Atlantis. According to the Greek philosopher Plato, Atlantis was an advanced civilization that existed around 9600 BC. This date coincides with the estimated time when a comet might have struck Earth, which in turn could have triggered the Great Flood. Atlantis is said to have been a highly advanced society with incredible architecture, technology, and knowledge. However, according to Plato's account, this civilization was destroyed in a single day and night of a catastrophic earthquakes and floods, sinking beneath the ocean and disappearing forever. The ruins of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey and Gunung Padang in Indonesia, which date back to the end of the last ice age, provide evidence of sophisticated construction techniques and architectural knowledge that were seemingly ahead of their time. Could the shared timeline between ancient sites and the story of Atlantis imply the existence of a global network of advanced civilizations that were destroyed by the cataclysmic event of the Great Flood? If these pre-flood civilizations were indeed connected, it would indicate that the world was once home to a thriving network of advanced societies, which were subsequently erased from history by a global cataclysm. And the potential extraterrestrial involvement in the Great Flood adds another layer of mystery to the stories of these lost civilizations. The Dead Sea Scrolls, one of the most significant archaeological finds of the 20th century, offer a unique glimpse into the ancient world and the religious beliefs of the people living at that time. The scrolls comprise a vast collection of Jewish apocryphal texts, including portions of the Hebrew Bible and other religious writings. In the stories that are contained in the Dead Sea Scrolls, Noah is portrayed as a remarkable figure with an unusual appearance. His complexion is described as being distinctly different from that of other humans, and his eyes are said to have a radiant quality, glowing like sunbeams. These descriptions have led some to speculate that Noah may have been an extraterrestrial being, or at the very least a human-extraterrestrial hybrid. Moreover, to the story of Noah and the Great Flood is seen as a pivotal moment of human history, suggesting that the flood was intended to clean Earth of the hybrid race that resulted from the interbreeding between extraterrestrial and human women. In this context, Noah's survival in his role in repopulating the Earth after the flood may be seen as an attempt by these otherworldly beings to preserve a specific lineage, one that was pure in their eyes. According to ancient stories, the world after the flood was significantly different from the pre-flood era when various mythical beings such as gods, giants, fairies, and other creatures coexisted with humans. So, the flood appears to serve as a turning point in numerous ancient texts, including the Bible and the Sumerian king list, illustrating that people lived much longer before the flood, whereas their lifespans decreased significantly after the event. Just as a comparison, here is a quote from the Sumerian king list that says, "After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. In Eridu, Alulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. Alajlar ruled for 36,000 years. Two kings, they ruled for 64,800 years." So it turns out that the Great Flood not only signifies a change in the human lifespan, but also highlights a shift in the relationship between humans and gods. Prior to the flood, gods were actively involved in human affairs, guiding them, interacting with them, and even engaging in romantic relationships with mortals. However, following the flood, the gods seem to have withdrawn, and their interaction with humans has become much more subtle and less direct. Some theories propose that this shift played a critical role in human history, as it allowed human development to progress without the constant influence and awareness of extraterrestrial beings. Did the sky gods view the genetic mixing of species as a mistake that needed to be corrected? Were they aiming to establish a pure human lineage that could develop independently without their direct intervention? The flood may have been served as a reset button for Earth's inhabitants, allowing the new version of humankind to emerge free from the influence of these celestial beings. The archaeological site called Naksuan near Mount Ararat in Turkey offers an intriguing connection to the legendary tale of Noah. Some believe that if Naksuan is indeed the first city built by Noah after the flood, the Ark itself might be hidden somewhere nearby. But what if the Ark was not a traditional vessel designed to carry pairs of every animal species, and rather it was a DNA bank that held the genetic information of all life on Earth? This concept aligns with the idea that the flood might have been a deliberate act by extraterrestrials to reset the genetic makeup of Earth's inhabitants and establish a pure human lineage. In the modern era, we are building our own versions of arcs in the form of seed banks and DNA repositories like the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway. These facilities are designed to withstand catastrophic events and preserve the genetic diversity of plant and animal species. The construction of these modern-day arcs highlights our awareness of the fragility of life on Earth and our need to prepare for potential global disasters. If we're truly descendants of an extraterrestrial guided lineage, what is our place in the universe and what is our relationship with these otherworldly beings? Are we part of a grand experiment, a product of their intervention, or simply the beneficiaries of their guidance? When we find the answers to these questions, we will hold the key to understanding our origins, our purpose, and our ultimate destiny. The Great Flood as a turning point in human history highlights the complexities of our origins and the potential role of extraterrestrial beings in shaping our past. As we continue to explore our history and the mysteries of the universe, we must consider the possibility that this cataclysm was more than just a natural catastrophe and may have served a greater purpose in the evolution of humankind.
Flood myths are a prevailing theme in global mythologies, often serving as cautionary tales or explanations for the origins of civilization. In Mesopotamian legends such as the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis epic, characters like Utnapishtim and Atrahasis are warned by the gods to build boats to escape catastrophic deluges. A similar story exists in the Hindu mythology, where Manu receives a divine warning from a fish, an avatar of the god Vishnu. Greek mythology offers the tale of Deucalion and Pyrrha, who survive a flood sent by Zeus and repopulate the earth through a unique ritual involving stones. In Native American Hopi tradition, the deity Sotuk Nak orchestrates a flood, sparing only the faithful who are led underground by the ant people. But what was it like before the global flood described in myths around the world? Accounts of antediluvian period often describe a landscape dramatically different from today's. Biblical texts and similar accounts in other cultures often portray the earth as an idyllic, fertile paradise. It was a time when humanity was relatively new and, according to some interpretations, possessed knowledge or abilities that have since been lost. The land was often described as lush and fertile, filled with abundant resources that made for an easy life compared to the hardships that would follow after the flood. The descriptions of the world before the flood vary across different mythological traditions, but there are some common themes. Interestingly, in many myths, the period before the flood is often marked by moral or social decay, disobedience, or some form of imbalance that prompts divine intervention. For example, in the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis epic from Mesopotamia, the gods decide to flood the earth because humans have become too noisy and disruptive, disturbing the divine order. Similarly, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the Bible records of the antediluvian period in the first chapters of the book of Genesis. According to them, in the pre-diluvian era, human civilization achieved great accomplishments, but also created a culture of sin. Native American Hopi tradition suggests that people had turned away from the path of spiritual balance, focusing too much on materialistic gain. According to Chinese folklore, the pre-flood world was a place of chaos, filled with suffering because the rivers had overflowed their banks and inundated the land. In African and Mesoamerican myths, like those of Tutsi and the Aztecs, the world before the flood was often a place of excess population in need of cleansing. So, what was life like for people at that time? What did they do? Obviously, the first antediluvian family as described in the Bible was the family of Adam. After being expelled from the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve settled and had sons and daughters. As we know, the first son of the first couple was Cain, but Cain was also the first murderer of the antediluvian world. He brutally killed Abel, his own brother. After his terrible sin, Cain received a mark from God and built a city in the land of Nod. Cain named this city after his first son, Enoch. This antediluvian city is the first city mentioned in the Bible. In the Sumerian creation myths, this city is known as Eridu. The Bible tells us that humans were created by God with the ability to think and make moral choices. Unlike what some scientific theories suggest, people didn't go through an evolutionary process to become who they are. This becomes very clear when we look at the biblical accounts of the antediluvian period. As mentioned, Cain, the first human being to be born on earth, was developed enough to build a city. His descendants in turn were responsible for great inventions. With Jubal and Tubal-Cain, antediluvian society learned to live in tents, to breed herds of cattle, to develop the arts with the use of musical instruments, and to forge tools through working with copper and iron. Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. Later in Noah's time, the Bible shows how he already had the capacity and the necessary resources to build a large ark according to divine instructions. Therefore, although the Bible does not provide many details about this period, it is clear that there was strong technological and cultural development in the antediluvian world. Many people wonder about the duration of the pre-flood era, but the Bible remains silent on this issue. However, numerous scholars suggest that the time span from the world's creation to the flood might have been longer than the remainder of biblical history. Attempts have been made to date this period, but without reaching a conclusion. In fact, the only source providing any chronological information about the pre-flood era is the genealogical list in Genesis chapter 5. Surprisingly, these stories from this period often feature larger-than-life characters, some of whom are said to have lived for hundreds of years. One of the most notable figures from the Judeo-Christian tradition is Methuselah, known for his remarkably long lifespan. He was the son of Enoch and the grandfather of Noah, and he is primarily known for his astonishingly long lifespan of 969 years. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he became the father of Lamech. Methuselah lived after the birth of Lamech 782 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. But he is not the only one who lived for so long. Here are some more quotes from the Bible. When Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image, and he named him Seth. After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Adam lived in total of 930 years, and then he died. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. After he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked faithfully with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enoch lived a total of 365 years. Enoch walked faithfully with God, then he was no more because God took him away. Based on the family tree data in Genesis chapter 5, we can see that people back then lived for a very long time, varying from 800 to 300 years. Is it possible that because they lived so long, they had plenty of time to learn new things and make progress in technology and other areas? Most Christians believe that these people really did live for hundreds of years, just like the Bible says. But the question is, how was it possible? Some scholars and theologians argue that extreme ages of the antediluvian figures could be symbolic, perhaps emphasizing their divine favor or wisdom. Others speculate on a different environmental context that could have supported longer human lifespans, and in fact the answer might be in the Bible itself. In other cultures too, there are tales of kings and sages who lived for centuries, imparting wisdom and guiding their people. In Mesopotamian tradition, figures like Utnapishtim were considered wise and God-favored humans who survived the deluge. According to the Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods decide to send a flood to wipe out humanity, but Utnapishtim is forewarned by god Ea and builds a massive boat to save himself, his family, and all animals. After surviving the deluge, he and his wife are granted immortality by the gods. Sumerian king lists, perhaps one of the most important ancient texts, perfectly describes a time in history before the flood where god kings ruled for thousands of years. One of the most interesting details about this Sumerian king list is the fact that the earliest list describes 8 kings who ruled the earth for a total of 241,000 years, with the original authority said to have come down from heaven until the time of the Great Flood that swept away mankind, and after it once again royal authority was cast down from heaven. Here is a part of the king's list. After the power came down from heaven, it was in Eridu Alulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. Al-Jar ruled for 36,000 years, and after him there are 2 kings. They ruled for 64,800 years. Just note that we're not talking about hundreds but thousands of years here. Many myths suggest a closer relationship between humans and gods, or even direct interaction and intermingling. According to the Bible, in the time before the flood, 2 main lineages represented the spiritual divide among humanity: the godly lineage of Seth and the ungodly lineage of Cain, the first son of Adam, who killed his own brother and thus committed the first murder. The Sethites were considered the keepers of godliness, a group that valued and upheld their relationship with God. Unfortunately, as this lineage mixed with the descendants of Cain, men who were not God-fearing, a spiritual decay set in that became unbearable. It was like mixing water with oil. The two could not coexist peacefully, and the end result was a society increasingly moving away from God. But even in this dark period, there were bright spots of spirituality. Abel was one such figure. His sincere offering to God made him a symbol of faithfulness, and he became the world's first martyr. His example of devotion was so impactful that it was still being talked about in New Testament times. Enoch was another remarkable individual. He was so close to God, walking in constant communion with Him, that he was said to have been taken up by God, bypassing death entirely. But what is more interesting is that during this period, the Bible speaks of enigmatic figures known as the Nephilim. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of humans, who bore children to them. These were the heroes that were of old, warriors of renown. Is it possible that this is the answer to the mystery with the long lifespan of certain biblical figures? In the book of Enoch, the Nephilim are closely linked to the Watchers, who are fallen angels that descended to earth and mated with human women. According to this text, these celestial beings taught mankind various forms of knowledge that were considered forbidden, ranging from astrology and divination to metallurgy. Their offspring with human women were the Nephilim, described as giants who were violent and corrupt, consuming all they encountered. Here is a notable passage from the book of Enoch, chapter 6 to 7. And it came to pass when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose our wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And they became pregnant, and they bore great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. The book of Enoch thus elaborates on the cryptic passages in Genesis by offering a much more detailed account of the Nephilim and the Watchers, casting them as figures of corruption and attributing to them much of the wickedness that eventually led to the Great Flood. But these giants were not only wicked, as they also helped humanity. One of the central themes in the book of Enoch is the imparting of forbidden knowledge to humans. The Watchers are said to have taught humanity various forms of knowledge that were intended to remain celestial secrets. This includes the arts of weapon making, divination, astrology, and other practices considered sinful or disruptive to the natural order. In chapter 8, it is mentioned, moreover, Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, breastplates, the fabrication of mirrors, and the workmanship of bracelets and ornaments, the use of paint, the beautifying of the eyebrows, the use of stones of every valuable and select kind, and of all sorts of dyes, so that the world became altered. The book also elaborates on the violence and moral corruption that overwhelmed the earth due to the influence of the Watchers and their offspring. In chapter 7 it states, Then they took wives, each choosing for himself, whom they began to approach and with whom they cohabited, teaching them sorcery, incantations, and the dividing of roots and trees. And they conceiving brought forth giants, whose stature was each 300 cubits. These devoured all with the labor of man produced, until it became impossible to feed them, when they turned themselves against men in order to devour them, and began to endure birds, beasts, reptiles, and fishes, to eat their flesh one after another, and to drink their blood. According to Enoch, the moral and spiritual degradation reached such a level that divine intervention became necessary, culminating in the Great Flood as described in biblical account in Genesis. In Greek mythology, there's a similar figure to Enoch named Prometheus.
Now, Prometheus, a titan, defied gods by stealing fire and giving it to humanity, symbolizing his role as a benefactor and a bringer of knowledge. This act of challenging the gods and bestowing wisdom on humans echoes the Watcher's actions in the Book of Enoch. This suggests that tales of divine beings interacting with humans before the flood, sharing forbidden knowledge, and suffering consequences for their transgressions are common across different mythologies. Greek mythology is also full of giants, powerful and monstrous beings who fought against the gods. Similarly, in the Book of Enoch and Genesis 6, we see giants created when divine beings mate with human women. Though we can't find a direct birth story of a god and a mortal woman creating giants, the character Gilgamesh from the Mesopotamian epos, who was 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, seems to hint at a common theme. In the Sumerian mythology, there are also stories of heavenly beings that came to Earth and communicated with humans, but they're called the Anunnaki. However, unlike the Watchers, in Mesopotamian myths like the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Anunnaki were said to have created humans as laborers and had interactions with them. According to Zecharia Sitchin's hypothesis, they came to Earth to mine gold and created humans to perform the task. This theory is controversial but provides evidence that the Anunnaki were the original creators of mankind. The Anunnaki claimed to have come from their planet Nibiru and could travel through stargates and wormholes. Zecharia Sitchin also claimed that the Sumerians learned astrology from the Anunnaki, which gave them a deep understanding of our solar system, including Venus and Saturn, and even depicted a 10th planet called Nibiru. Heroes like Abel, Enoch, and Noah emerged as beacons in a morally clouded world, each in his own way embodying the virtues that will later be rekindled in the post-flood civilization. It is this bright contrast that makes the antediluvian world an eternal subject of inquiry and reflection. Its end by cataclysmic flood isn't just an account of divine retribution, but a reminder of the cyclical nature of human experience. Like the sedimentary layers left behind by receding waters, the stories and lessons from this time have been compressed into the bedrock of our shared consciousness. They warn us of the perils of spiritual waywardness, while simultaneously inspiring for the untapped potentials of human endeavor. In this way, the antediluvian era serves as a cosmic mirror reflecting both the brilliance and the shadows of humanity. It proclaims a timeless message: though we may fall, there's always a chance for a new beginning. So as we navigate our own complexities and uncertainties, may we heed the wisdom echoing from this distant past, applying its lessons in our present to build a future that harmonizes both the wonders of human achievement and the nobility of spiritual purpose.
When Alexander the Great reached the Indus River, and thus the farthest point of his military expedition, he met several holy Indian men. They told him fantastic stories, including one about an enormous boat that had come from the west in ancient times and had since then turned to stone. He wanted to see it for himself, so on the way back, his expedition stopped by a small island in the Arabian Sea, in modern-day Pakistan. This island is now connected to the continent named Ormara, in honor of one of Alexander's generals, Ormazd, who died nearby. There, lying not far from the coast, he found an enormous vessel, slightly tilted to one side and made entirely out of stone. It was the famous ark built by Noah to save humanity and animals from the legendary Great Flood. It is still visible on Google Earth. But how did it end up in the Arabian Sea, more than 3,000 kilometers or 2,000 miles from where the Bible said it ran aground, at the top of Mount Ararat? The surprising answer has to do with what happened immediately after the flood, and with what Noah did for the rest of his life. The key to understanding exactly what happened after the Great Flood is to know that the biblical Noah went by many names, including in the same Bible. In the classical Greek tradition, Noah was identified as Dionysus the Younger. In the Zoroastrian book of Zend-Avesta, he is called Yima, and the Kabbalistic tradition explains that Noah was the secret identity of a sage called Melchizedek. But these were not all the names he received in his long life of almost 1,000 years. In Sumer, for instance, he was known as King Ziusudra. Ziusudra is the same figure that the Babylonians call Utnapishtim, the survivor of the Great Flood in the Babylonian Epic of Gilgamesh. In Sumerian literature, Ziusudra was warned by the main god Enki to build an ark so that he and his family might be saved from the Great Flood. The Sumerian story of the flood is different from the Egyptian and the Hebrew stories, because in this case, the flood was the consequence of a natural event, and not the direct doing of the gods. Writer Zechariah Sitchin has demonstrated that every 3,600 years, a planet called Nibiru comes close to Earth, and its gravity pull has catastrophic consequences. In his book, The End of Days, Sitchin calculated that due to its highly elliptical orbit, Nibiru caused the Great Flood 6,000 years ago, and then passed close to Earth in 556 BCE. The next time we will be able to see Nibiru and feel its consequences will be in the year 3000. Nibiru was not just another planet. It was the home of the Anunnaki, a group of ancient astronauts that came to Earth and were worshipped as gods by various cultures. What is important here is that when Nibiru passed near the Earth, every human would die. Enki, one of the Anunnaki worshipped on Earth as the god of water and wisdom, warned King Ziusudra about the upcoming flood, so that he could have enough time to build an ark in the mountains. When Nibiru approached, the flood that catastrophically swept over the Earth wiped out most of the human settlements. After 6 days and nights, the storms receded, yet most of the land had disappeared. Finally, the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, as the Bible repeats. Interestingly, the Babylonian account stated that the Great Flood was not merely the result of heavy rains, but also colossal winds that increased in intensity, thereby destroying buildings and rupturing dikes. These are the kinds of events we might expect from a large planetary body passing by Earth, or a large celestial object striking Earth, such as a giant asteroid. The story known as the Epic of Gilgamesh states that Enki instructed Ziusudra, "Tear down this house, build a ship. Give up possessions, seek thou life. Despise property, and keep the soul alive. Aboard the ship, take thou the seed of all living things." Some people believe that Enki did this not because he loved humanity, but because he saw this catastrophe as an opportunity to improve the genetic composition of the humans and animals on Earth. That is why he asked to bring the seed of all living things. The Ark of Ziusudra became a sort of gene bank of the ancient world, ensuring that only the best individuals of each species survived. In the Hebrew Bible, the same story is told. This time, Enki is called Yahweh, and Ziusudra is called Noah. When Noah was alone, Yahweh manifested himself and told him, "Go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and his mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and his mate, and 7 pairs of the birds of the heavens also, male and female, to keep their offspring alive on the face of all the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground." Every living thing on the planet perished, except for those who were aboard the ark and the fish in the sea. It is said that even when the rain stopped after 40 days, the waters took 150 more days to drain out. Still, the land was wet and unstable, and Noah sent out a raven and a dove to make sure it was safe to descend. After 3 unsuccessful trips, the dove came back with an olive branch in its beak, so Noah's family and all the animals could finally safely populate the earth again. Before all the living creatures left the ark, Yahweh spoke with a warning. He said to both men and animals, "Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image. And you, be fruitful and multiply, teem on the earth, and multiply in it." This meant that he was not afraid of sending a second catastrophe if humans did not behave correctly. And so, Noah's sons began repopulating the world. The descendants of Sem or Semites became the Jews and Arabs of today. Cam before the ancestor of all African peoples, and Japheth spawned all Indo-European peoples. But why were ancient gods so worried about blood, seeds, and souls? In his classical book Chariots of the Gods, Eric von Daniken has a very interesting interpretation of the biblical Genesis. He recalls that before Noah knew about the flood, his grandfather Methuselah was forewarned of this tragical event by Enoch, who soon afterward was seen ascending to the skies in a fiery heavenly chariot of spacecraft. Von Daniken says, "Does this not seriously pose the question whether the human race is not an act of deliberate breeding by unknown beings from outer space? Otherwise, what can be the sense of the constantly recurring fertilization of human beings by giants and sons of heaven, with the consequent extermination of unsuccessful specimens?" Seen in this light, the flood becomes a preconceived project by unknown beings with the intention of exterminating the human race except for a few noble exceptions. But if the flood, the course of which is historically proved, was quite deliberately planned and prepared, and that several hundred years before Noah received orders to build the ark, then it can no longer be accepted as a divine judgment. One of the goals of the Anunnaki was to breed a slave race to perform manual labor. To that end, the Anunnaki infused their DNA and genetic material and effectively improved the human race by giving them many physiological features, strengths, and abilities not previously occurring in then existing people. According to von Daniken, aliens have been interbreeding with humans for a long time, but their first experiment went terribly wrong, and the results were bad. So the Anunnaki decided to kill most of humanity and start over again. But this time, they would not take chances. How did this new and improved human race thrive and conquer the new world? Climbing out of the ark was only the first step. The Bible says that when the waters receded, the ark ran aground in the mountains of Ararat, which are considered sacred by the Armenians. Several archaeological expeditions have attempted to find the ark in the area, but all failed because it wasn't left behind after the Great Flood. Noah continued to use it later to travel to India. It is thought that this happened several years after the flood, and in the first times he established himself with his wife and sons in the vicinity of modern-day Yerevan, where the waters of the flood left fertile soil that was ideal for agriculture. By that time, most of humanity had perished, and Noah's family were the only people alive in the world. They couldn't hunt animals for fear of extinguishing them. How could they rebuild civilization? And more importantly, who helped them? The answer to these questions is hidden in plain sight in the pages of one of the most read books in history. According to the biblical book of Genesis, chapter 9, as soon as Noah stepped onto dry land, he turned to agriculture, becoming a man of the soil. The first thing he planted was a vineyard, with which he made wine and afterward drank it. One day, his son Ham found him completely drunk and naked, lying on the floor of his tent. He called his brothers Shem and Japheth, who immediately proceeded to cover their father, but avoided looking at him directly. It is then said that when Noah woke up, he cursed Ham and his offspring for laying eyes on his naked body, and decreed that his family would always be a servant to his brothers' families. This story begins to make more sense when we look at other traditions and learn that every story highlights the fact that after the flood, it was Noah who taught every living person how to cultivate the land. As Yima, it is said in the Zend Avesta that he taught people how to build a fenced settlement and keep cattle, men, and dogs inside, and to always have a blazing fire. According to this ancient text, Yima instructed people to drain off water, put up boundary posts, then make houses from posts, clay walls, matting, and fences, and to expand the earth by tilling it. In Kabbalistic tradition, the secret identity of Melchizedek was Noah, a great leader who had come from Atlantis to teach humankind agriculture, the cultivation of corn, and the vine, and is also hinted that he never really died, but moved to another dimension. In the Kabbalah, Melchizedek is the spiritual teacher of Abraham and one of the wisest men to ever live. The Sumerian tradition explains that with floodwaters receding on Earth and the planet of Nibiru moving out of our solar system, the Anunnaki and the handful of surviving humans started to reconstruct the world. Enki, the Sumerian Noah, was known as both a scientist and an engineer. He could have easily helped humanity by building dams and waterworks, but he did not want mankind to become spoiled, as the Adamu had been before the flood. He taught them engineering and oversaw the works to drain the marshes on the northern shore of the Persian Gulf, near the mouth of the Euphrates and the Tigris. Dikes were constructed under his supervision, irrigation systems were dug, and canals connected both rivers, facilitating agriculture. The new humanity was more like the Anunnaki than the previous human civilization. Fauna and flora were brought directly from planet Nibiru and given to the Earthlings as domesticated animals and plants to harvest. In the new Sumerian schools, knowledge of botany, zoology, geography, mathematics, and theology was imparted. The Anunnaki also taught astronomy, science, architecture, metallurgy, agriculture, and much more. Regarding that, the British author Mark Booth has an interesting explanation. The curious story in Genesis of Noah's sons uncovering his genitals while he was drunkenly sleeping also refers to the petering out of this process. We saw that the genitals were the last part of human anatomy to evolve into their present form, and his sons were curious to find out about their origins. Were they sons of a human or a demigod, a man or an angel? In the Greek world, it is common to find statues with their genitals covered by a vine leaf, the same plant Noah planted after the flood. Furthermore, the Greek god of wine was Dionysus, and Dionysus was one of the many names of Noah. Other Anunnaki entities came to Earth after the flood and helped found kingdoms in the valley of the Tigris and the Euphrates. One Anunnaki king became known as Sargon I of Akkad, and others reigned over Assyria and Babylonia. These alien monarchs were worshipped almost as the representatives of gods on Earth. They gave humans the law codes and made social reforms. Eventually, when humanity was advanced enough to govern itself, the Anunnaki stepped down and let humans rule, not before breeding with them, thus improving the genetic traits of humankind. Although no one has managed to do it yet, some believe that because the Sumerian language is thought to be a simplified version of the Anunnaki language, a sufficiently intelligent scholar could theoretically reconstruct the Anunnaki language. The original Anunnaki mission headquarters at the Sumerian city of Nippur was destroyed during the Great Flood. It was decided that a new control center would be built at Mount Moriah, which meant in Sumerian and possibly in Anunnaki language, Mount of Directing. Mount Moriah became such a holy place that the Temple of Solomon was constructed at its peak, 2,500 years later. The city of Jerusalem was founded between Mount Moriah and Mount Zion. This is the spiritual center of all major Western religions and one of the most sacred places on Earth. The Homo sapiens, a creation of the Anunnaki through careful gene manipulation and interbreeding, multiplied greatly. each generation of hybrids was stronger than the previous one. In time, human settlements quickly expanded to all the continents on Earth and became the dominant species on the planet again. By this time, the daughters of man were so civilized, beautiful, and sophisticated that the descendants of Anunnaki pursued them. This resulted in children born with extra intelligence, physical strength, and extraordinary abilities. But this also meant that there were now two classes of humans. Those who had both human and Anunnaki parents were the dominant class. But those who were only human were of a lower class and were sent to the gold mines to work. A very short time after the flood, the Anunnaki began to be worshipped as gods, and their descendants that were part Anunnaki, part human, were destined to be kings among men, intermediaries between the Anunnaki and the rest of humankind. Pure humans tended to work, either in agriculture, mining, or trading between other communities. Meanwhile, in Egypt, the firstborn son of Enki, named Marduk, gained sovereignty shortly after the flood receded, and Egyptians welcomed him as Ra, their sun god. But Enlil, the brother of Enki, feared Marduk's power, and so he persuaded his father Anu, the leader of the Anunnaki who lived in Nibiru, to use 7 mighty weapons against Marduk. The war between Marduk and Enlil was so destructive that Zechariah Sitchin called it the end of days. The nuclear weapons had been brought directly from Nibiru and hidden in a cave to protect them during the flood, and also to prevent humans from finding them. When the Council of the Anunnaki approved their use against Marduk, some of the explosions were seen from thousands of miles away. For instance, the ancient Indian text known as the Mahabharata surely took influence from the Anunnaki War when it described how war broke out between the early masters of Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, and Kot-Diji. According to the text, flying machines called vimanas, whose description is exactly the same as the Anunnaki flying craft, launched a weapon that seemed to be enormously devastating. Ancient Hindu texts describe what they called vimana as flying palaces or heavenly chariots. In Indian art, they are depicted as golden, shiny, round vessels levitating over the ground. Interestingly, one of Anunnaki's main objectives here on Earth was to mine enough gold to repair the atmosphere of Nibiru, and the same material was used as an outside cover for their spacecraft. Like the Egyptians and the Sumerians, Hindu people called the aliens traveling in the Vimana gods. It is at this point that the story of the Ark becomes clearer. It is said that after the flood, Dionysus the Younger, often depicted in a boat, traveled from Atlantis via Europe to India to teach the whole world the arts of agriculture, the sowing of crops, the cultivation of wine, and writing. Writing had already been taught by Enoch, but was now in danger of being lost in the devastation brought by the flood. The Greek epic poet Nonnus described Dionysus' migration to India, and the same journey is also described in the Zendavestra as the March of Rama on India, which is the origin of the great Indian epic, the Ramayana. Dionysus, or Noah, did not move into uninhabited territories, but went to various places of the world, teaching the peoples how to cultivate the land and to develop civilizations. One story that repeats itself many times is that of Dionysus forbidding cannibalism and human sacrifice wherever he went. Native priests in India would sometimes keep enormous snakes, which were worshipped as gods and fed the flesh of captives. The Ramayana describes how Rama and his followers suddenly invaded these temples with torches, driving out both priests and snakes. He would appear without warning among enemies, sometimes with mighty projectile weapons that the texts describe as bow and arrow, and sometimes petrifying his enemies with his pale, lotus-blue gaze. In the Ramayana, Rama is described as dispossessed, a nomad whose kingdom lay beneath the seas. This explains what Noah did during his 350 years on Earth after the flood. He roamed the world, taking many different names and teaching the people, who were his descendants, agriculture as well as how to achieve a high degree of civilization. Afterward, according to different accounts, he either ascended to his home planet on a Vimana or descended to the depths of the sea, where the ancient civilization of Atlantis lay. According to the Indian texts, in either case, he had to leave the ark behind, which turned to stone over thousands of years near the mouth of the Indus River. But perhaps his most enduring work is found closer to the original place where he had built the ark in ancient Egypt. The biblical tale of the top of a mountain being the first thing to emerge from the waters after the flood is eerily similar to the Egyptian tale of the beginning of the world. In fact, there are two Egyptian myths about the creation of the world, a fact that puzzled Egyptologists who did not understand why they had created two different tales. Now we know that this is because there were two times when creation happened, once at the beginning of time and later after the destruction caused by the flood. In the first myth, before the creation of the world, there was nothing, only an endless void. Ptah, the god of craftsmen and sculptors, created himself and then the rest of the world by uttering secret words only known to him. This original world collapsed during the flood and was replaced by an endless sea known only as none. The second story of the creation states that at this time there was only one god, Atum. He made a mound emerge from the primeval waters of none, and this original mound of earth was the source of everything in the world. Standing upon that hill, like Noah on Mount Ararat, according to the Bible, Atum created the god of air, Shu, and the goddess of moisture, Tefnut. The ancient texts tell different stories about how Atum created the first gods. In the pyramid texts, it's described as sneezing and spitting to make Shu and Tefnut, but in later texts, it's said that he created them through masturbation. Moreover, it's clarified that the hand Atum used represented the female principle within him. This underscores the significance of genitals in the post-flood era and sheds light on why Noah reacted angrily when his son saw his genitalia. Shu and Tefnut were the first godly couple in ancient Egypt, and they joined together to give birth to another couple of gods. These were Geb, the god of the earth, and Nut, the goddess of the sky. Together, they formed the borders of the world, marking exactly where it starts and where it ends. Geb and Nut had 4 children: Osiris, the god of fertility and rebirth; Set, the god of chaos and the forces of uncertainty; Isis, the god of motherhood; and Nephthys, which was a female version of Set. The ancient Egyptians called the time immediately after the flood Zep-Tepi, literally meaning the first time. Not because it was the first time it happened, but because it was the time when they started counting the days. And every day was considered to be a recreation of the Zep-Tepi. This time is also used for astronomical observations, which in ancient Egyptian times were incredibly accurate. Hundreds of years later, the pyramids were built following these observations, and they were made to resemble the primeval mound of Zep-Tepi. Every year in Egyptian history began with a festival called Wepet Renpet, meaning literally the opening of the year, which recalled the Zep-Tepi and coincided with the flood of the Nile, which was of course linked to fertility and the possibility of growing crops in Egypt. As we have seen, the god of agriculture was Osiris, one of the gods in the 3rd generation since Zep-Tepi, and the first pharaoh of Egypt according to Plutarch. Osiris is an interesting divinity, and one of his first distinctive characteristics was that he was always depicted as having green skin, which has been mistakenly interpreted as a sign that he was of alien origin. Actually, the color of his skin is a symbol of fertility, as he was the one who taught agriculture to the ancient Egyptians. Some people identify Osiris either as Noah's son, Ham, or Ham's son. In any case, he continued civilizing enterprise that Noah started in the whole world and laid the groundwork for one of the most powerful and important civilizations in human history. Royal Egyptian lists, such as the Palermo stone, often mention that Osiris and his wife Isis ruled Egypt for more than 400 years, after which they ascended from earth. After an initial period in which the so-called gods ruled the country, they finally considered humanity worthy of self-governing, and thus left the planet and turned the power to the pharaohs, who ruled Egypt for thousands of years afterward. In a remarkable turn of history, the one who conquered Egypt and ended the rule of the pharaohs was Alexander the Great in the year 332 BCE, shortly before coming across the original vessel used to sail the waters during the Great Flood. The Great Flood was a catastrophic event known to every ancient civilization. Each of them has a particular explanation as to why it happened, how they managed to stay alive during the violent storms and rains, and how they were able to rebuild civilization afterward. But despite the differences, there are a few things that are already clear. Higher beings, the Anunnaki, tried to genetically improve our human DNA so that we could be more useful to them in their search for gold. They were dissatisfied with how the first generations of human, the Adamu, turned out, so they killed almost all of them. Humankind could get back on its feet only thanks to the unwavering help of Noah, who traveled the world with different names: Yima, Dionysus, Zisudra, and Melchizedek. Thanks to his efforts, he gave humanity the gifts of agriculture and wisdom, and the best thing we can do with that wisdom is to keep our ears and hearts open to the truths of the universe.